Welcome to the FastBridge Data webinar. We're going to look at the math data from FastBridge. So first I'm going to use this training site to help us navigate the different reports. So if we look along the top, we have teacher, training resources, screening, progress monitoring, and reporting. And so we want to look at the reporting piece. So inside this reporting piece, there's several different reports. And what we want to look at is just the group screening report. So there's a reason why we're only going to look at 2 of these reports. The reason that we use a universal screener is for 2 purposes. The first purpose is to assess the health of the universal system. So to assess math instruction universally. The second thing that we want to do is we want to identify our students who are at risk and then be able to provide additional support as necessary. Right? We may do additional assessments with those kiddos that are at risk. We'll do a diagnostic. This may include some interventions, all derived from this universal screening once we determine how at risk they are. And so there's really only 2 reports. Even though FastBridge has many reports, we're really just going to look at 2 of them. So the first report is this group screening report. Inside this group screening report, we want to click A Math. And then we want to select the teacher, and then we also want to select fall. So we'll come to this group screening report, and when we see the different shades that include the blues and the greens, then we know that we're in the normed group screening report. So if we look over here to the right, we see color coding, we see norms, and we want to go ahead and change that to benchmark. So we'll push on that blue arrow, select benchmarks, and then we'll get these reds and purples, pinks and purples. And if we scroll down, we can see that we get this little bar graph at the top, and then we get some individual scores for students in our class. So first, looking at this bar graph at the top, this 9% for this F is fall, W is winter, and S is spring. So this darkest category is the highest risk. So our students that are at the highest risk. So 9% of our students in the fall were in this high risk category. 30% of our students in fall were in this some risk category. 13% of our students in the fall were in this low risk category, and 48% of our students were in this advanced category, right? Thinking of them as like the least amount of risk. So one of the reasons that we want to use this universal screening data for is to assess the health of the system. So what we mean by that is looking at the percentage of students that are at risk. So we have 9% of students that are at high risk. We have 30% of students that are at low risk, at some risk. So what this tells us that there's 39% of our students that may need a diagnostic and then additional intervention time. That is a large number and hard for this teacher to be able to manage within a classroom. We really like it to be 20% at least, or 15% of our students that are needing risk. So when we have such a large number, that tells us that we need to look into universal instruction as a whole and look at the curriculum. We may look at instructional time. We may look at whether the standards are being addressed. And that just leads us to look for more information universally, as opposed to trying to address those students within an intervention, because there's just too many of them, and it's not possible to have a quality intervention with that many students. So the second thing we want to use this data for is this report for is looking at our students and looking at their scores. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down, and we'll look at our students here. One of the things that you can do is they default to alphabetical. If you click underneath fall score, you'll get this toggle switch that comes up, and you can toggle so that it puts students in from highest score to least, or you can go from least to greatest. And so going from least to greatest, put your students that are at risk at the top, which is kind of nice to be able to see them right there. So we can look at these students here that have 2 exclamation points. Are these 2 students, are the 9%, those students that are in this 9% category. Students that have 1 exclamation point are in this 30% category. Students that don't have anything next to them are in this 13%. And then students that have that star are in this advanced, or think of that as the least amount of risk category. Still thinking them as like low risk. So that takes care of this group screening report. Let's go ahead and go back to our report. I'm just going to click on reporting. It's kind of the easiest way to get back there. I'm going to skip all these other reports and go down to the bottom where it talks about individual skills report. I'm going to select A Math. Select the grade with appropriate teacher, and then I'm going to select the fall interval. On this report, we need to be careful, because on this individual skills report, we only actually want to look at this top piece of data. We do not want to look at anything below the graphics, right? Where it talks about numbers and operations. We don't want to look at any of that stuff, because we know that a universal screener can really only give us 2 pieces of data. And that's the health of the system, and that's the students who are at risk, and that's it. So the one thing that I like about this graphic is that we can see where the student is in that continuum. And like this student in particular, we can see that they're labeled as advanced, but we can also see that they're fairly close to that low risk category. So it's kind of nice to be able to tell if you have bubble kids, especially if you have a bubble kid down here, especially close to high risk, or maybe they're in that low risk category, but they're really close to some risk. And so if your intervention could hold that number of students, those might be a couple of kids that you might pull over to help them as needed. So really, those are the 2 reports that we suggest looking at to gain this data from. So again, remembering that the purpose of a universal screener is to assess the health of the system, right? Think of it as like taking your temperature when you go to the doctor, right? How healthy are you? How healthy is the system? And then the second thing is basically thinking of color coding our students into these risk levels, right? Our students that are high risk, some risk, and then low risk, and advanced being that least amount of risk, right? And those students that have those high risk and some risk, we want to make sure that we can, give those students diagnostics to find more information. So this universal screener does not tell us anything particular about student skills, any of that information. That's what we use that diagnostic for. All right. Thanks, guys.